Okay, so welcome, Erik Lönnroth. You're going to correct the pronunciation for me, even though I practiced
I
it
think that
a
was
few
great.
times.
9 out of 10. 9 out
Thank
of
you
10
very
on the
much.
pronunciation.
From Watobe. We first met in 2018 virtually. We had we were introduced by someone in our network, and you were doing research at the time and into maths and Edtech that can support maths, teaching and learning. And now Watobe is live. So perhaps you want to just start off our conversation by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what's happening with Watobe.
Sure thing. And thank you for this opportunity. It's nice. We've been in a bit of stealth mode. We haven't done any PR or campaign, so you're probably the first person to do a proper interview with me since we launched this. So yeah,
Fantastic.
You can always put that down if we go big at one point.
If you go big, I can say I interviewed them first.
Yeah, exactly. So where to begin? Right. Let me start with 2015. That was when I met my current co-founder, Henry Warren. He was at the time a director of innovation at Pearson in London. And so Pearson, obviously the world's largest education company. And Pearson was looking at ways of expanding into new exciting markets and doing things digital, which had not been its traditional strength, being more in the textbook publishing industry. And Henry was looking to pull together a team because he had been passionate about doing things in Africa for a while. And I met him over a dinner, and my background had been management consulting, and specifically with a focus on sort of project managing development programs around Africa. So I had previously lived in places like DRC, Burundi, and Ethiopia, working for DFID and the like. But I had made a switch in my career by that point into technology, into product management for software companies. And so when I met Henry, he thought it was a good fit, and he put me in charge of a project in Tanzania back in 2015, where we took tablets and smartphones into rural, remote villages to people who had never had them. And we loaded them full of educational games and other things that they could access offline. And we kind of met with some families and visited some schools, and we just dropped them off there and said, yeah, have fun. And then we took a step back and we just kind of visited and monitored and saw what happened. It was not very scientific in terms of an approach. It was much more sort of close to the ground, qualitative, sitting around, looking over a kid's shoulder as they tap on the screen, basically saying, can they use this? Do they stay interested in it? Do they learn anything? Although we weren't, very rigorous at that point.
It sounds a bit, sorry, just to pause you, it sounds a bit like Shigata Mitra's hole in the wall studies.
For sure. Yeah. When I saw that TED Talk, and I had seen that TED Talk several years earlier, something just really resonated within me. And I was like, wow, there's something here that's so exciting. And I can say that TED Talk was a very strong contributing factor to me deciding to focus on education as a sector. Because I don't have a background in teaching myself. I have a business background. I studied economics. So I came into education because I saw it as the vehicle to bring about development, not because I had been a classroom teacher or anything like that. So in those villages, we met with some families, and we saw the way they really valued education, but had few opportunities to do anything about that. These were really poor bottom of the pyramid type families. So we said, okay, there's potential there, but it's also extremely difficult to do anything at scale in that last mile kind of village beyond the grid, beyond main roads. So the next step was take it into more urban areas, just slightly more affluent segment that could afford their own smartphones. Again, this is 2015, so 5 years ago in an African context is quite a time when it comes to the digital uptake and so on. So we launched a storybook app with storybooks in Swahili and English that we loaded onto the phones using SD cards. And we gave those to about 50 families spread across various schools in the town of Arusha, Tanzania. And then we had a control group of another 50 or so families that didn't receive the app. And we measured baseline reading ability. And 30 days after handing these out and monitoring usage, we measured it again.
Okay.
And during that was essentially a randomized control trial, although it wouldn't quite meet the bar that sort of a rigorous academic institution would set. It did, however, meet the bar for what we internally needed as a project. And we did consult with a research team within Pearson who are full of PhDs, and so they did give it the green light. They did review it and say it was really exciting that we were doing it. And the thing that came out of that was a really significant jump in mean reading speed, or fluency as it's called in the literacy circles.
Fluency is the measure, one of the key measures.
And so it was like more than a standard deviation difference over 30 days. The kids increased their reading speeds by something like 11 or 12 words per minute, up from 50 something to 60 something. Can't remember the exact numbers now.
But ask you, sorry to keep interrupting you, but as you say things, another question surfaces, which is pertinent. So the storybooks were storybooks. There was no direct instruction added onto the phone. It was a simple case of providing resources, reading resources to people who didn't have them before. And then you said you provided them in Swahili as well as English, and were they the same stories or different?
Mainly Swahili, because the kids were young, and in Tanzania they don't actually learn English until they get into high school. So I think 90% or something of the books were in Swahili. They were yes, all the same for everyone. We had kids in grades 2 to 5. We had, during the baseline study, we had excluded the tales. So the learners who were really poor readers, we excluded them because we knew that they wouldn't even be able to actually read a sentence and understand it. And likewise, the kids were already very strong readers. We knew that we wouldn't be able to measure an uptick in their fluency. So we excluded them as well. We just used the middle, okay? And if you ask me now what the exact range was, I'm not sure, but I believe it was if you were between 20 words per minute and 80 words per minute or something like that, we included you. And if you were either side of that, we excluded. That's my memory of 5 years ago.
Sure.
Could be wrong. So why we did that was we had noticed that there was just a lack of reading materials. There was a lack of access to books, especially relevant for children, and so stories that they could engage with. At most, some of them had school books, but these were academic. I mean, these worksheets, workbooks, little stories, and then exercises at the end. But there was no reading for pleasure at all in these communities. And to the extent that people had books at home, there were maybe 3 of them on a bookshelf, one of which was the Bible, and that was it, right? So very little for kids. And that's common right across the African continent. It's not new to anyone who's been investigating this. But we said, what would happen if we gave access to these resources? And so, as I mentioned, a significant uptick. When we did the kind of evaluation later, we said, well, this is amazing. This kind of confirms Sugata Mitra's assumptions that you just give access to things and it takes off. We let it sit for a while, like 2 or 3 months. And then we had this idea, why don't we just go back and test them again? We haven't spoken to these families since we were last there. Why don't we just go back and run a follow-up test? We hadn't planned to initially. So again, like from a research design perspective, it's all wrong, et cetera. But we did it anyway. And interestingly, we saw that there had been a slide back towards the mean, and that the control group and the treatment group had converged toward each other. And so we said, well, okay, that's interesting. Why did that happen? So we started doing qualitative interviews. Have you kept up the reading? Have you done this? And by and large, the families would say, no, we didn't keep it up. We thought the trial was over. And we said, yeah, but we didn't take the books away from you. You still had them there. You had talked to us about how much you valued the resources and how great they were and how much you would see children reading. Why didn't you keep it up? And they said, oh, we didn't think we were supposed to, or basically they were looking for an authority to tell them you should keep reading and you should continue this daily habit. It hadn't, they had still been very much part of this research project in their mind, or this intervention. And the moment those supports were taken away, for many of these families, it was like back to business as usual, back to, not reading or monitoring my children's use of this device, et cetera. And maybe, there's also an argument to be said for they finished all the books and they got bored of them. But actually, I don't believe that's the main cause, because many of the kids loved rereading stories. They had favorite stories. They'd read them all the time. So I don't think it was just that. It was rather the lack of engagement with families around reading. And what we realized was that our monitoring efforts throughout the weeks, where we had texted parents saying, hey, has any reading happened? Or hey, give us an update. All those little touch points had actually added up to creating more than a just resource dump. They had created more of a structured program where there was follow-up and monitoring. And although we were, from our perspective, doing it mainly as a data collection exercise, from the participants' perspective, they felt seen and engaged with and supported and all these things.
And encouraged.
Parents were, and encouraged, and parents had been put in WhatsApp groups where they could exchange ideas and thoughts, and they say, so-and-so just reported a reading stat for the week for their child, maybe I should do the same. So there's that peer pressure. All those things had been kind of inadvertent in our research design, but they ended up having a big impact. And when we removed them, the behavior stopped. Sure. So that taught us a second really important lesson around behavior change, which is the need for human touch and engagement and making people feel part of a program rather than just saying, here's a bunch of resources. So it's the difference between having a library that opens on the street and saying, bunch of books, go in and check them out and do what you want, versus having a organized reading program and drive where you come around, you bring people into there, you show them around, you give them the books, you suggest this, you ask them later, did you read it? I mean, all that hard work it actually has an impact on behavior change.
It's meaningful, yeah.
So, okay, fast forward now, a couple of startups later and a couple of projects later. So, I mean, I continued with this in Kenya. I ran it on my own, and then I went to Zambia and I did some other stuff with other companies. And about 2 years ago, Henry and I reconvened and we said, let's start our own company. We tried to do this under various vehicles with others. Let's do it on our own. So he and I became co-founders of Watobe. By that point, we had started looking at mathematics, which is the subject that later on in secondary school, most students struggle with. It's attractive and for a few reasons. Not only is it a problem subject, it's a critical subject for getting admittance to any tertiary education. It's often the one that kids are lacking, meaning they can't get into medicine or engineering or whatever they want. It's quite standardized. So if you can teach it well in one country, chances are you can teach it well in multiple countries, meaning we don't have to do a whole content recreation exercise if we take it from one country to the next.
Although language of delivery, may need to change, but I don't know. Yeah.
Correct. So we were focused on Anglophone Africa for the foreseeable future, which is a very large market in itself.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. So there's actually some good evidence of other organizations doing a good job in the teaching of mathematics. So not only in Africa, where there's some exciting project, but I would look especially at Asia. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the kind of tech companies that are growing in places like China and India, there is a huge uptake of supplementary educational apps and programs by households. So it's not just EdTech in schools, but it's EdTech at home.
Yes.
And it's purchased by parents, and it's not an insignificant investment on their part. Yeah. It is starting to be a quite significant share of wallet. And both Henry and I had a desire to do something that went beyond being an NGO or not-for-profit. We wanted to build something truly scalable. We wanted to be a company that can attract venture capital and bring in significant investment. So we launched it as a for-profit initiative, and we decided that we weren't going to go to that very bottom of the pyramid this time either. We were going to go, I think, to the sort of middle, what you could call middle class. So maybe in a South African context, think of it as like fourth quintile households. So people not quite at the very top, but sort of one step down. They might be sending their kids to fee-paying schools. They may have Wi-Fi at home. Not always, but some do.
Well, they at least have access to sufficient data to be able to run,
as well, right? They're not living in shacks and they're not struggling to put food on the table most days, although this year has been a bit crazy even in that regard. Yeah. That's our target market for Watobe, and it's focused on high school maths. Mm-hmm. And we've taken many of the lessons from those early initiatives at Pearson, and we've applied them here. So rather than just giving them access to videos and exercises and say, you guys get on with it, I think our magic kind of ingredient, our secret sauce, is that support, that human touch, that follow-up, that not letting them just get on with it without supervision, but following up, nudging, reminding, where necessary, offering them some tutoring support on an exercise or a question so they don't get completely stuck, frustrated, and demoralized. And likewise with parents, we're following up regularly, sending out reports. WhatsApp is our main channel of communication to parents, because email isn't as common, and it's more conversational. We can send voice notes, and we can even jump on a phone call once in a while and talk to them and see, how are you getting on? How are you feeling? Not just, have you done your homework, but how are you doing, right?
Yes, for sure.
And those real human touch points, I think, are resulting in our app being much more appreciated, first of all, by our customers, and second, leading to higher retention. And one of the things in technology in general is that software companies try to make this zero marginal cost product that just can be downloaded millions of times, and that's fine and very exciting if it works, but it can often, in the space of education technology, lead to a bunch of downloads and then very little retention.
Yes.
As a subscription service, we rely on customers staying with us for it to work. So we overinvest in that first month of acquisition, onboarding, really giving them a very thorough onboarding onto the program, betting that early investment is going to pay dividends over time. Yes. And so that's how our business model works, and that's how our pedagogical model works, and our customer service model works, basically.
Okay, it sounds like a very sound approach, and very exciting at the same time, and it prompts a number of different questions. So I'm going to try and just choose two paths of inquiry, right? So as not to overload you. One, Khan Academy is like the gold standard, right, for support, supplemental edtech, educational technology, specifically in the maths arena, because that's how it started, as far as I know. It does not, as far as I know, provide this kind of high touch. I've been onto it and I've referred people to it, but I've never, seen this kind of high touch sort of experience, learner and tutor communication experience built into it. And yet it seems to be very successful. How do you explain that?
All right, so Khan Academy is very successful in the sense that it has lots and lots of kids who have used it at some point.
Okay.
In the sense that it got millions and millions of users.
Yes.
But if you look at the total proportion of Khan Academy users and you ask which proportion of those were active this week, it's not a very large percentage,
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So Khan Academy is kind of like a reference library where you go when you need help with something, and then when you no longer need help, you don't use it.
Yes.
And we knew from talking to teachers and pedagogues and reading about this that it wasn't the case that most students in Africa are fine with the majority of the curriculum, but they just need that little extra help in one area. Rather, their knowledge of maths is like a Swiss cheese, just full of holes everywhere. And so it's not enough for you to get one little intervention in one small area of the curriculum and then you're back up to where you need to be. No, it's much more like a daily or weekly program that follows along with you. And Khan Academy isn't set up to be that program that follows you all year round. Sure, you could use it as such, but without a guide or without a teacher or without somebody pointing the way for you, it's unlikely that you're going to do that day in, day out.
Okay, so that leads me to the second path of inquiry, actually, quite naturally, which is great, and that is baseline or diagnostic assessments. So when you onboard a specific learner, what is the process? I mean, do you do some kind of baseline to assess where the holes are, and then make recommendations about further study or exercises from there on?
Okay, it's a good question. It's one that has been the source of vigorous debate within the company. Where we are right now, and I'm not saying this is where Watobe will remain, but where we are right now is treading a fine balance between wanting as much information as we can get about a user so as to help them in the best possible way, whilst not overwhelming them in the early stages of the process by giving them too many onerous diagnostics and other things that might put them off. Because you also have to be very wary of their emotional state as they're coming onto this unknown program, and just throwing a bunch of challenging questions their ways, even if they're scaffolded or built up, it is still quite a lot, right? So as a B2C education product that is not being forced on anyone, but rather something we want them to enjoy and to stick with, we have to be very wary of their emotional kind of journey. And if they start to disengage and find this is too much, we don't have a teacher standing over them saying, you have to do it. They'll just go, I don't want to do it. And their parents will go, well, they don't want to do it. And I can't, I can nag them only so much. So we're much more responsive to the kids in that sense. So this has steered us away from any kind of upfront meaty diagnostics. That doesn't mean that we can't sort of gradually get to know our users the more they use the app and build over time a pretty elaborate picture of what they know. So anytime they're exposed to a new topic, for instance, we can start to gather data. What do they know within trigonometry? What do they know within statistics or something like that? But we've taken the view that we're going to do that over time rather than all up front. This means that our early, the things they're first to exposed to on the app might be either completely standardized, so everybody in grade 10 gets the same few lessons, or it could be that we use a simple input like, what was your last term mark in school? And if they tell us 40%, that gives us a ballpark idea of what they know and don't know at that stage in their school career, versus if they tell us 60%, that's a different place, and 70% is yet a different place. So I wish I had a more kind of robust answer that is just like, this is how we do the diagnostic and baselining is perfect, and we know, and we can then get super adaptive and use the techie intelligence that lots of people are talking about. We've taken a bit more of a casual approach to it right now. And we also are probably supplementing with human touch more. So we can do things like, are you finding these lessons useful? Is there something you'd like to see more of, less of? And if you were to choose, what would you choose? Okay, why did you choose that? Oh, because you're tired today and you don't want to do something difficult. Fine. Or oh, you're feeling up for a challenge, or you have a test on that tomorrow. Yeah, good choice. So there's so many motivations as well from a learner. We don't want to be entirely driving the decision making on their behalf. Rather, our MO is suggest and then allow the learner to disagree with that suggestion and override it to pick something else. So we don't want to just face them with a paradox of choice where they have hundreds of lessons that they could look at, because it becomes overwhelming just to choose. And interviewing learners about that kind of interface, we find that many times they just click things at random, which tends to not be the best use of time. And nor do we want to be so prescriptive that we always say, you have to do this because we decided. Rather, we say, we suggest this. You can choose to disregard that, maybe get a new suggestion. And if you disregard that a few times, you can also go and browse the whole curriculum and pick something of your own. So flexibility within certain constraints.
Okay. So thanks. That fills out the picture, and it's useful. So here's a scenario, okay, to really embed it in my mind. I imagine I am a parent. I have a grade 9 child who is currently getting 55% for mathematics, but the child wants to get 65%. And it is May, right? The June exams are looming, those are important. One of the reasons the child wants to get 65% is because at their school, if they don't get above 60%, they're going to be told they need to do maths literacy, right? Because the school has limited places in the maths program. We know this is sometimes an issue. What do you do with this child? How many lessons? How do you go about onboarding this specific child? And what do you say to me, the parent? Do you say the child's going to need 20 lessons, one a week, or how does it actually work?
Yeah, so we don't have any as of yet. And again, bearing in mind our company is quite new and we're still experimenting around many of these things. So if you ask me a year from now, we may have evolved on this. But we don't currently have a formula where it's like you need this much time in order to reach this mark based on where you are today. We could potentially average it out and see what's happening with other learners, but there's so many confounding factors. Early on, when we first started the company, we wanted something like that, which is like 3 months to get a pass, or if you spend just this amount of time, you guaranteed something, right? And then we saw all the individual differences, and then we saw the differences between teachers and schools. I mean, the June exam is not identical from school to school. It can be quite variable. So if some teacher just decides to give you a really difficult June exam, you'd be lucky to just stay on your old mark, let alone go up, right? And then the parent would come back and blame Watobe. And it's like, I paid for you guys and nothing has changed.
And providing guarantees in education is
right. Right. So for all these reasons, we are careful not to say we guarantee this or that or the other, especially on short time. Yeah, especially on really short time frames. What we will say is, look, getting a 10% gain over the course of a month is going to be a stretch. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, not unheard of, but hard. So what are you willing to commit between now and that day, in terms of your own effort? And, we would recommend that you do this daily, right? We would recommend that normally it's like 15 minutes a day is the recommended amount, but in your case, we might say for at least 30 minutes a day. We know that if we ask for like an hour a day, it wouldn't happen actually, because they have all their additional schoolwork. So we try to keep it sensible, but somewhere like 30 minutes a day. Who will monitor that? You might be able to keep it up for the first 4 or 5 days, but by week 3, who's going to check that you're doing it? Mom, can you actually put a reminder and make it routine? Is there a time of day when it would suit you to do Watobe so that you're not remembering at 10 p.m. at night? Perhaps, after you get home from school or right after dinner or something like that. Where are you going to do it? You're going to sit on your bed, not ideal, or are you going to sit at your desk? Are there going to be distractions? You're going to try and study with the TV on? Sometimes we talk about those things because a lot of learners don't have a great study environment at home. And then it's also a matter of saying, look, we have certain resources available to help you. So there's a chat that you can open and talk to one of our tutors. And we'd like you to use it when you get stuck. We initially were afraid that if we made these resources available to learners, that everybody would flood to them and it would become incredibly expensive for us to maintain the service. While some kids do use it a lot, the vast majority don't open that chat and ask questions, even when we can see from the data that they're struggling. And we have to nudge them and follow up with them and say, no, really do use it. Come on, ask us if you're stuck. Don't think you need to do it all on your own. And it turns out in conversations with those learners that various psychological blockers are there keeping them from asking for help. And I think it's not just true of kids, it's true of everyone. We don't like to go to the doctor when we're sick. We don't like to ask for help from anyone. We want to do it all on our own. And actually, it takes some cajoling and trust building in order for them to be able to ask for help. And so that's another side that we work on. And then we say, look, we can't guarantee a score, but we can guarantee that if you put in the effort with Watobe, that something good will probably happen. And if it's not for the June exam, then at least you'll get close enough that you can probably convince them that I'm on this great trajectory and let me try again in November. And then, hopefully I'll get the mark I need.
So what they're mainly engaged in then, sounds like, with the option of getting the direct support via the chat function, which is great. But at minimum, what students are working through are exercises that are scaffolded in a particular way in order to help them learn the principles and then be able to apply those principles.
We basically aligned it to the South African curriculum. It's just
South African. Say that again. I didn't catch that because I was speaking.
It's just aligned to the South African curriculum right now. We haven't created any of our own pedagogical structures around it. And the reason for that is that we wanted learners to be able to find resources and to see terminology that they recognize and a structure that they recognize. So although we might feel like, well, the order they teach things here isn't ideal for various reasons, we want to do it like this, we've actually decided just to stick with the curriculum as is for simplicity and to aid communication about what we're talking about, right? And this is an ongoing tension, right? So there's another pedagogical side of this. And I don't know whether your audience is full of maths teachers. If they are, they might find this interesting. If they're not, they might find it less interesting. But
maths is a key area of interest for everyone in South Africa because of the need for us to develop more STEM graduates.
So I think it's common knowledge among people who study education that one of the issues, the way we organize our schools, is that you're in a grade, but that grade is only an imperfect measure of your actual understanding within a particular subject. Yeah. It would be better to teach the learner where they're at rather than teach them based on their grade level. Mm-hmm. And so there's a constant tension for us, especially with some of the weaker learners, where we say, you may be in grade 10, but we want to teach you the grade 7 curriculum again because you're missing much of it. And the kids are like, well, no, that's, baby maths, first of all, so I don't feel like I can feel like I'm being sort of patronized just by being taught these basics, fractions. I know fractions. And then the second, I have a test in 2 weeks on Pythagoras.
Content.
I need you to teach me the thing I'm going to get tested on, not the thing that I was tested on 2 or 3 years ago. And we say, well, this is a prerequisite. If you don't know this, you're going to fail this. But that's a conversation that isn't always easy to have. And our approach is to just balance it. So we try to recommend things that are relevant, but we also are okay with them overriding that and saying, no, I know what I want this week. I need this because I have a test. And there's nothing that's going to snap them out of that short-term mindset if there's an actual looming exam or test, right? We just have to go for that. And their parents want to see short-term results. Their parents can never be convinced that, like, if you do Watobe for 3 years, you'll eventually see, marks increase. That they don't have patience for that. So we need to meet our customers halfway. So we might have an ideal of how they should be spending their time, and that could at times be at odds with the customer's more short-term interests. And so we've chosen a hybrid.
Yeah, I mean, you're being pragmatic.
Right. And I think the thing that we could do if we really wanted to is we could pick that fight and say, we know how to teach maths, we know which order to teach it in, and you should just trust us. But we would have so many tough conversations, and we would literally have to convince every customer one by one that this is the right approach. That it would eat up all the time we could be spending on other more fruitful things. So I think this is similar to parenting in every regard. Like, it's very easy to have like a theory of parenting, like never give in or always be consistent. And then you have kids. I don't have kids myself, actually, but my co-founder does.
But you're ahead of everyone else because you know that the theory and practice are different. So well done.
Yeah, but then you met with the reality of what it's like to actually have children. You're like, sometimes you just let them have ice cream because it's easier, And
I've raised 3 children.
Right. So, we kind of coming up against that a bit. And at least they have an idea what they want to do. At least in those instances, they're saying, I want to do maths, just not that. I want to do this, which is not, a bad thing. It's worse when they say, I don't want to do maths at all. Right. So when they're coming from that perspective of they're just fed up with a subject, there's a whole other slew of interventions and things that we can discuss, which are more kind of psychological and emotional. And sometimes it's about breaking through certain limiting beliefs and mindsets, and there's a lot of literature around that as well, of course, growth mindset and seeing yourself as not dumb but having the potential and so on. Yeah.
It's not a weakness, it's a challenge and an opportunity.
Right.
But now, changing the internalized mindset that one is not good at something and hence should stop trying is very, very difficult. And the earlier you can work with humans in that domain of potential change, the better. And one of the best places to do that is with their school studies. So, to the extent that you are actually focusing on that, well, that's incredible. That will,
we are. I mean,
to their entire life.
Yeah, for sure. We're now in mid-November. So I've spent the past several weeks calling customers, as have my team, and we've been chatting to them. Partly to let them know about revision resources like past papers and things that we've made available within the app, but more so just to check in and see how they're doing. And almost every customer I speak to, every learner I speak to reports feeling stressed, worried about exams. It's like almost universal. It's rare to find the one who's like totally chilled about it. And when I say, well, what are you planning to do between now and next Thursday when you have your first exam? And they said, study all the time. Okay, I'm going to get to bed at like, way past midnight, and then I'm going to get up the next morning and study again. And my response to that is often like, okay, well, here we are, final week of the year. What do you think is going to be more helpful in terms of your marks? To study as much as you can in these last 7 days and arrive bleary-eyed and tired and unfocused to the exam, or to study and take it seriously. You can put in a few hours a day, but get to bed on time, exercise, practice self-care, feel relaxed, feel focused, and arrive in the exam well rested so that you can concentrate and not make silly mistakes. Now, which one of those do you think is going to yield a better result? And they go, oh yeah, well, maybe you're right, and so on. But they feel this need, the pressure they put on themselves is to, like, if I don't study like a maniac, I'm not doing it right. I'm being lazy, something. And I'm not sure what messaging they're hearing in school. A few of those schools, I'm pretty sure, are drilling home the message that you have to take this like it's a matter of life and death, because they are coming from the perspective that the learners are all lazy, and unless you scare the living hell out of them, they're not going to take it seriously. But I actually think that strategy often misfires, and the kids just feel too much pressure, and then that's why they just
they just disengage completely.
Yeah. So we try to flip it and say, you know what, like maths isn't the end of it, like the world if you fail or succeed. And I play this, like most of our learners are girls, because Edtech tends to be mostly used by girls, which is one positive. I think we're actually like 80% of our users are girls. So most of the time I'm talking to girls, and I say, fast forward, imagine yourself as an old granny thinking back about your life. What do you think are going to be the highlights of your life? And it's really interesting because a few of the like 16, 17-year-olds, they're probably like graduating, matric. And I'm like, you know what? I think when you're 80, you're not going to remember matric. I don't think it's going to be like the main thing that happened to you. Come on, think a little harder. Think about your whole life. I was like, oh, maybe I'll have family. Yeah, how about that? Maybe your kids. What else? Maybe, I may have met somebody. Maybe I did something. Career. Okay, yeah. Those are probably the highlights of your life. How important do you think your grade 10 November exam is going to be? Yeah, maybe not so important after all. Right. So it's just about giving them perspective and to say, this isn't the end of my life if I don't get the result I wanted. Not to get them to disengage completely, but whereas many people assume they're not taking it seriously enough, I actually think that a lot of the learners are taking it too seriously and have no sense of perspective and can't just say, it's better that I'm well rested and I show up sharp rather than like I study throughout the night because I'm so afraid that if I miss one detail on one page of some subtopic, then I'll fail the whole thing, and so I think the service we offer is, yes, pedagogy and how to teach maths and make sure they do the 15 minutes a day. But that's all throughout the year. The closer you get to the exam, the less studying matters and the more mindset and just being fresh and just being well rested and confident and managing your time well, those things start to matter. And we talk to parents about this as well. And we're like, please make sure she's in bed by midnight. Please make sure, or before then, really, Please make sure that she is taking breaks. She says she studies for 7 hours straight and then she can't remember a thing. Like, no wonder. That's not how the brain is meant to acquire information. We're supposed to, do this in bursts and then, go and take a walk or something. So we're just teaching them some of the basics of the science of learning and trying to snap them out of this extremist mindset that you're supposed to wake up in the morning, roll out of bed, open your books and not close them until you go to bed again.
What are the actual practices of high-performing individuals? The actual practices, not the imagined practices, but the actual practices, because no one who's achieving repeatedly can do so if they're burnt out.
And I have to practice this myself. I'll take some of that advice and I'll say, as a CEO of a startup, it's very easy for me to feel like I'm never doing enough and I have to always do better and everything. And then I realized, like, no, actually, sometimes the output is more a function of the quality of the few decisions I make throughout the week that are really consequential. I'll make hundreds of inconsequential decisions and I'll make like a handful of really consequential decisions. And if my mindset is sharp and I'm rested and I'm calm when I'm making those decisions rather than wired, underslept, like over-caffeinated, whatever I've done to myself, it's going to be a drastically different outcome.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that's leveraged by the fact that my mood will affect my staff's mood, et cetera. And that's very true. If you ever find yourself at the top of any organizational hierarchy, you just have such a huge emotional impact on the people around you. So I think that the greatest service I can do to my company and the people in it is to just show up feeling good every day. And let that energy transfuse, like osmosis, be felt by everyone else, and then that'll eventually go out to our customers. So it's almost like on a spiritual plane, like I'm trying to just like embody the calm that I want to earn.
I am the Buddha.
It'll pour down like water from the mountainside and eventually go into our customers.
Well, things flow downhill, and it's preferable if it's healing water that's flowing, right?
Right.
So you're right. Culture is created at the top. And if you're driving something by being the CEO of a startup, then you must have a lot of possibly what is called type A personality, attributes within you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to drive it. Wouldn't be able to manage the risk and all that and the uncertainty that comes with that. But you're right. It obviously has to be balanced. I'm interested to go back to the very interesting piece of information you provided, which is that 80% of your users are girls.
It's not only our users, but one of my colleagues, a guy who runs our marketing and sales effort right now, he did a piece of research around this, and he reported that is in line with standards in EdTech worldwide, or at least in the markets he looked at. So
at any level, or just at the secondary
school? No, in this
level?
age range. In this age range, I think, for a few reasons. So girls.
Just to pause again. What is the age range? The actual age range?
So we are now teaching grades 7 through 12. So basically high school or secondary school.
13 to 18, whatever.
Yeah, something like that. So within adolescent, teenagers, there's quite a large maturity gap typically between girls and boys, right? Boys tend to be more impulsive, worse at concentrating. They tend to perform worse in school as well. The fact of sitting down and doing a daily maths practice on an app is the kind of diligence and sort of goody two-shoes behavior that is more commonly seen among girls in that age range. Guys, the boys do catch up eventually as they grow older and mature more, but it is just harder for the most part to get that commitment from boys. And they tend to be more okay with challenging authority as well. So if they don't like it, they'll just tell us, I hate this, whereas the girls will often just
more agreeable. Girls are more agreeable. There's lots of studies that show that women are more agreeable. Hence, we earn less. That's one of the reasons we earn less.
Correct.
We don't demand more.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I've read some of those big 5 personality studies as well, and I think they're both higher on conscientiousness and agreeableness at that age, most likely. So they're more hardworking when it comes to their academics. They're probably a bit more orderly. They're less chaotic in general in their lives. Now, having said that,
and higher rates of neuroticism on average amongst women. So I would assume also amongst girls. I don't know if you've read, because I haven't read studies that look at neuroticism, so anxiety, predisposition towards anxiety or depression amongst girls of that age range, in that age range specifically, but women on average are higher in those. So more likely to worry.
And when you just look at the rates of anxiety and depression among teens in general, and they look at the impact of social media in recent years and how suicide attempts and everything else have gone up, I'm sure that is affecting this demographic that we're serving as well, coupled with the fact that their access to sort of counseling and other support services is far more limited than at the top of the income ladder. It's all likely to have an effect, which is why this mentoring, coaching service that we offer in addition to tutoring might, in retrospect, be at least as valuable, if not more valuable, than some of the maths that we teach. We don't hire qualified counselors, so we're careful not to go all the way over into therapy and trying to talk them through their traumas or anything like that. It's much more like the way I described before. Your exam is coming up. Why don't you get some perspective on that and realize it's not the end of the world? Why don't you chill out and get some sleep? And that's a level I feel we're okay to coach the learners at. We don't need some what's it called, qualification to say those things. But if we started venturing into, well, talk to me about the roots of your anxiety and what's causing it at the most deep level, then we would be venturing outside of our area of expertise. And so there is a line to tread there. But for sure, so much is linked to this. And I speak from personal experience as well. I've had my own issues with mental health, and I can directly correlate times in my life when that's been difficult for me and my performance or lack of performance academically or professionally. So it's a whole human being. we're not just treating mathematicians, we're treating people and helping them and supporting them. And the same goes for their parents. And I think this year, as I said at the start, 2020 has just been kind of crazy because the amount of stress and issues, not just for the learners, but for parents who may have been without income, et cetera, is just through the roof. So yeah, the reality is that at a time when we thought, oh my gosh, everybody's going to be so focused on the studies and the lack of schooling, and it's going to be top of the priority for them. And then we actually thought about it some more, and we're like, no, it'll probably be lower priority than usual for many of the families because they don't know where their next paycheck is going to come from. So their kids' maths tutoring suddenly just falls in terms of importance. And that's what we saw, in fact, right? They only really started to worry about mathematics again when schools announced they were reopening after lockdown. That was when the spike came, not when the lockdown was happening. It was the wealthier families who were worried throughout lockdown because they could put food on the table and they were thinking about my kid's future, et cetera. But families were struggling just to put food on the table. Like, yeah, this was not top of mind. And
also, I imagine that wealthier families were also looking for ways in which to occupy their children, because to suddenly have to homeschool your child, which is what all parents were faced with, is a very difficult task, especially if you're trying to, get your own work. And
there's a huge difference for a parent who themselves has gotten matric and studied and gone to university and their ability to help a learner versus one who maybe only had 7 years of schooling and hasn't even encountered the kind of material that their kid is now doing and feels helpless when it comes to advising. So yeah, there are huge discrepancies there. This is why it's so interesting to be in this kind of income and demographic segment that I described earlier, not the very bottom of the pyramid, but nor is it the top, right? So it's what we internally refer to as aspirational class citizens who are trying to break into, the more affluent middle class segment. But they have a ways to go, and they realize that education is the way they're going to provide that pathway for their children. But coming up against that is all the social, institutional, and other pressures that put blockers in the way. So, everything from being around the wrong peer group when you're in school that distract you from, academic success, to not having enough role models in your environment that show that this is possible, to poor instruction in school, absent teachers, et cetera, et cetera. There's a series of hurdles. And our pricing right now is 199 Rand a month for the math
program. Very affordable.
Yeah, which is, about the equivalent of 1 hour, or less actually than 1 hour of private tutoring. But we give them a whole month of this, and they can access our tutors at any time. And so
they can access the content as often as they want to, and hence, access tutors via the chat function as often as they want to during that month.
That's right. So our tutors don't work in the middle of the night, but from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. we're available.
That's amazing.
And as I said at the start, we were wondering whether this was even going to be viable, just from a pure cost perspective. Because if every kid is asking 10 questions a day, that becomes impossible, right? At a 199 price point. But it turns out they don't. For the most part, they self manage, and using a combination of the videos we made available, the hints, and so on, they muddle through most of the time, and only occasionally do they use the tutoring chat, and so it works out for us for now. Where I think we want to increase the support and the touch is around the times when we notice activity levels drop. This is another important part of behavior change. Behavior change is not about instilling the right behavior and then it's constant and it's perfect throughout. Just like anybody who's ever tried taking on a new habit, it's not just smooth sailing. Ups and downs. And it's okay to dip and to have a few days or even a week where you didn't do the math the way you're supposed to. But if that days or weeks turns into many weeks, then that now is a failed habit. So it's about those interventions. How do we get them back onto the wagon, back into doing the things that we wanted? Occasionally, it's sufficient to just send a reminder text like, hey, we haven't seen your daughter in a while. And when that goes to the right type of mother, that mother will ensure that the behavior comes back. But quite often, it requires more than that. And it requires a conversation where we drill down into the core reasons why somebody has stopped using it and diagnosing that and helping them through that. And that's where, again, there's a night and day difference between just something that's fully automated. Like if we had a push notification that went out, every time you haven't done something, that is not nearly as effective as picking up the phone. And this is again where I think EdTech as a whole has a lot to learn, because it's like split between two camps. The camp that does everything in totally face-to-face, non-scalable way, and it's brilliant for the few people who happen to be in that classroom with a good educator, but it's not going to change education across the face of the African continent, where hundreds of millions of learners are getting an inadequate education, and more so over the remainder of the century as the demographic pyramid just keeps expanding, and there's a constant chronic shortage of teachers in schools and so on. We need a technology-driven solution to bridge those macro issues and those fundamentals or systemic issues. But that technology solution cannot be totally devoid of human touch and support. Rather, it has to be a mechanism to deliver at the points where it matters most, a little bit of that human support. Some of it because it's pedagogically needed in order to teach the subject, but most of it because it's emotionally required for the learner. And that has been neglected by, I think, a lot of EdTech companies out there who see it purely.
It's neglected. It's not only neglected by EdTech companies, it's neglected within education, face-to-face education contexts as well.
It's the notion of a learner as like an empty vessel, and we just fill it with information and then the job is done. That's the wrong model, right? That's the wrong analogy. It's like this mechanical, just stuff their head full of info and then off they go into the sunset as full of the knowledge they need. But it's much more of a fragile emotional being, full of limiting beliefs and self-doubt and so on. And you gotta see that person
and hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
So another question: what kind of results are your learners seeing? Are they improving? So, is it too soon to tell?
This is an area where I wish we had better data at this stage, because it's hard given the fact that we launched quite recently. We don't have like thousands of learners who've gone through this. We have more like, since the start, we've taken on a few hundred, and and some of those turned, and we've had to replace them, etc. So we're not really at the scale where we can say with confidence what the difference is. We're also, like I said before, it varies quite a lot from school to school whether an exam is harder or not. So let's say somebody joined us in August and we have them for 4 months. So let's say August, September, October, November, and then they sit their exam. Well, we should have been able to do something positive in that time period, right? But if we compare their term 3 results to their term 4 result, very often we'll see a decline. And that's not because Watobe has had a negative impact. It's because in South African schools, your term 4 results is mostly driven by the end of year exam, which covers a whole year's worth of content, whereas term 3 covers one term.
The segment,
And so now we have to actually do this control study where we say, okay, compared to the class average, did you improve or not? So, if your class average went down and you stayed flat, that's actually decent. And it requires a data collection effort that we haven't been able to do just yet. As we expand, we'll be able to look at national figures and we'll say, well, and we'll be able to look at longer time frames. So we can look at the 2018 cohort compared to the 2019 cohort and the 2020 cohort and so on. So this is a trickier question than you might think because of all the...
I understand it's a difficult question, which is why I said, whether or not you added the,
one of the things we know anecdotally is that a lot of learners have come to us and said, this has been amazing. I used to fail and now I'm succeeding. Parents who say, I'm so happy that, and on a qualitative basis, they say things like, she never used to study. She never used to open her books. I had to shout and complain all the time. Now she comes home.
Well, that in itself is a win, right? That's a win.
Without me having to mention it, she'll get her books out. She'll open her phone. She'll do Watobe before she does any of the other homework. And then she just continues. When she's done with math, she does life sciences. She does the other stuff. And I can just see a change in her. And we have testimonials on our website if you want to hear parents talk about this stuff.
I saw those. Amazing. Yeah, it is amazing.
Yeah.
So using your own, sorry, Erik, using your own tests in order to assess progression, because obviously the external tests, i.e. the tests that are going to be provided by individual schools, are always going to be variable. So would it work to do it in that way? And do you have plans to do it in that way?
Look, we do have plans. expand and improve the kind of testing, bearing in mind what I said earlier. We don't want to do a rigorous baseline test, as interesting as it would be from a data perspective, just because of the user experience. But we should be able to look at where you were at the start of the year and then a few months later. Teasing out Watobe's contribution to that is another matter, because we're not the only maths intervention happening. They are also going to school. They are also being taught by their teachers. So if we say at the start, you didn't know this, 3 months later, you know that, I mean, that you would expect that anyway in terms of schooling. So figuring out the incremental value that Watobe offers is a more challenging data gathering.
You need control groups, I guess. So, but whether or not that's possible, and
Here's what we plan to do, right? So when the time is right, because we are looking, and it needs to be probably driven by a business need. Something like a significant partnership opportunity or a requirement for a fundraise for us, we will invest the funds necessary to get an independent evaluation of the effectiveness of the program, where it's not our claims, it's an independent evaluation, and we'll be able to put that out there and say that's what we do. I think it's important for all education companies to take efficacy seriously and to get it done in a rigorous way. And the fact that we ran a randomized control trial 5 years ago with Pearson is an indication that I do take that seriously.
Yeah, I know.
But given the limited funds we have right now, it wouldn't be a wise business decision to put tens of thousands of dollars towards that. Sure. Rather, for the time being, we're focused on some of the nuts and bolts, like ensuring that our server isn't crashing, and that we have content coverage, and that our tutors are well trained, and so on. And we're using some of these anecdotal stories, but we're also listening to the kids who churn and who don't want to stay with it, and say, okay, what wasn't working for you? And there are interesting things coming out of that. I mean, maybe I can say a few things about that. So the learners who decide not to stay on with us often do so because at the end of the day, they decide that they need even more hand-holding and human intervention. It's quite common for them to say, I realized I need a private tutor. I can't do this in a majority self-paced way. I need somebody to sit next to me and talk me through everything. And if the parents are able to afford that, great. But it's not something that we can do within our model.
Sure.
Another reason they turn is they just feel like, and this is particularly true of the weaker learners, they just don't understand the videos and so on. And it's because despite us trying to aim material at them at the level they're at, it's, you actually got to take them so many steps back, so many levels back, that it's almost like where do you stop, right? And we were teaching Maths Lit for a bit this year, and we've decided we're not going to continue teaching Maths Lit next year, because we don't believe that the model we've come up with is ideal for learners doing Maths Lit for the most part. Some manage well, especially if they're getting higher marks in Maths Lit, but the learners who are below 50% in Maths Lit, it's extremely challenging to teach anything to them using videos or any other method. I mean, even private tutoring is challenging. Like, it's really, really, really hard to reach those kids in a way where the knowledge sticks. You just feel like a broken record repeating the same things over and over again. So, we've had to decide who our target learner is, and we've come to the conclusion that our target lies somewhere between 30 and about 60% at the baseline when they join us.
Yes.
Maybe up to 70%. But if you're below 30%, we don't think that the program is probably going to do you that much good. And if you're above 60 or even 70%, then you're looking at such advanced material, trying to, deepen your mastery of problem solving and things like that. We don't have enough content there, because most of our content is just foundational concepts, like this is how you do stuff, this procedures. So we've had to narrow the scope of who we try to reach. We would love to reach everybody, but we can't. When we target learner, and we do so in a consistent way, and we give them the good onboarding at the start, so they understand that this is more than an app. This is a program and a commitment, and you're supposed to uphold your end of the bargain. It tends to work quite well.
Sure. What is the role, you mentioned Maths Lit, which is an interesting subject, and a necessary subject as far as I'm concerned. Although obviously we don't want a situation where we have too many learners taking mathematical literacy and hence not progressing, and doing what is called pure maths until grade 12. But what are you finding is the role of language in tutoring and learner ability? Because in mathematical literacy, we do also know that some of the stumbling blocks there are related to linguistic competence in the language of instruction. So what are you finding with the tutoring scenario with mathematics? Or did you also find that a stumbling block with mathematical literacy when you were offering that service?
I should have probably offered this caveat earlier in the conversation, but I did mention I am not myself a maths teacher, right? So what I'm relaying here is my observations of a pretty limited group over the course of a year and a bit, right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
You really want to, I'm sure you could find people who know.
No, I'm interested in, when I'm asking for your perspective, it's really just to get your perspective.
So as a kind of lay person, right? Somebody not trained as a teacher, what my own two eyes, what I've seen is that misunderstanding the question is like the main source of losing marks for kids in math lit. Carelessness, you could call it that, but I think it's more like, so have you heard of System 1, System 2 thinking with like Daniel Kahneman research and behavior economics?
Thinking fast and slow.
Right, thinking fast and slow. I think what happens is something like you see a math question, you kind of skim read it, you see a few keywords and you go, oh, I know what to do. Ratios. Ratios you multiply, or ratios you divide, or whatever. Without looking at the detail of the question, and there's this lazy pattern matching or this rapid pattern matching, not to use a pejorative term like lazy, but rapid pattern matching, like ratios multiply. It's this attempt to be very formulaic and to not stop and think, wait, does this even make sense? I've just converted grams into kilograms and I'm saying that everything is like 1,000 times more. No, like that doesn't make sense. Like how much is 1,000 kilograms? It's like the weight of a car. Come on, like, there's a lack of stopping and thinking, and does it even make sense? Whereas, she should have divided by 1,000. Okay, it should have been 0.001. Oh, okay, right, yeah, that makes more sense because that's the weight of a pill, right? And because we were talking about, like in this example, we might have been talking about tiny pills, and very often I try to just pause and get learners to slow down. I have a series of videos on our Instagram page because we did a little experiment with whether we could get engagement on Instagram. Wasn't
you need to be successful. On TikTok and dance, and then maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But we should have done it on TikTok, exactly. But we put a video up on Instagram. I put a video up on Instagram where I talked about problem solving for Maths Lit specifically because we kept seeing this jumping to the wrong procedure based on like keywords that have been misinterpreted. And yes, language and lack of careful reading, which might be just based in lack of understanding the English or just not fluent concept, it's all there. It's ironic, right? Because Maths Lit is supposed to be easier than pure maths in some regards, but it is more dependent on literacy. And so whatever you gain in terms of easier maths, you often like slide back because your literacy levels are low. So, but I still think Maths Lit has an important part of the curriculum. Some people say it shouldn't be taught at all. I disagree. I think for some learners it's appropriate. And it is definitely, the case that if you can't do Maths Lit well, we're now talking about a level of, a lack of numeracy that's so debilitating it will affect your life. You won't be able to do your taxes. You won't be able to calculate what you're owed at the till. You won't be able to do basic budgeting in your life, right? And you won't be able to think about things like, should I multiply or divide by 1,000? And that's a problem. So I think it has use, and the key thing is to move them from fast thinking to slower thinking. Just put the brakes on and say, go, wait, does it even make sense? And I encourage things like draw out the picture and so on, like various steps that will slow their thinking down. But I wish I could say that's the solution and that's how it should be taught. Again, I'm a lay person. People have way more information than I do. I've also read some resources that suggest that there is no magic pill when it comes to problem solving. Rather, it is domain-specific knowledge against a lot across a number of topics that collectively create competence and problem solving. And it's not like if you just draw a picture, you'll get the right answer. Because there's a chicken and egg problem. Like if you misinterpreted the question to begin with, you'll probably draw an inaccurate picture of it. So like sometimes you want to tear your hair out with where do you start and how do you help these learners? And you know, the reality is for us right now is we don't think we're the best program yet. I hope that one day we will be able to include them again, but we just noticed that we weren't having the kind of impact we wanted to see on a majority of math lit learners.
I mean, the other issue with problem solving is that it requires significant, well, there's a correlation between one's problem solving ability and one's working memory capacity. One needs to be able to hold multiple things in one's mind at the same time in order to understand the problem, ask the right question, and then, you know, go through, which domains of knowledge to bring, you know, which procedures to bring to solving the problem. So there are a number of different influences, and there's obviously a question, an ongoing question around how much that kind of thing can be taught, you know, and the extent to which those kinds of cognitive abilities can be improved over the course of a lifetime. And then obviously at a certain age it declines, and there are all kinds of other factors, right, that influence our ability to think. Our nutrition, how much stress we're experiencing. I mean, if we look at the trauma statistics in South Africa, we know that large segments of our community, and hence some of the people who enter your program, would have suffered significant trauma in their lives. And that has an impact on one's ability to think, regardless of how smart one is. So that obviously, you know, studying that kind of thing is obviously beyond the scope of any commercial enterprise, and beyond the scope of the work that most teachers are doing, although we do know that it has an impact. You've highlighted interactions as being very important, and you've highlighted the need for a high touch, relatively high touch, sort of contact between the tutor and an individual student. What about other interactions, though, between students who are enrolled in your program or in other programs, in the research that you've done, you know, in other kind of EdTech interventions, as well as the interactions between parents and students? And you've touched on that a little bit as well, but I don't know if you can expand on either of those other types of relationships and interactions.
Interestingly, the #1 most requested feature of our cohort last year was ability to interact with other learners on the platform. I and my co-founder Henry, we both believe that there is a very exciting opportunity for whoever can crack how to make EdTech more social, in a you know, in the right way, because there are many attempts and many ways to do it that don't work. That all, you know, either are just a distraction and don't help learning in any way. At worst, to turn it into more of a social media product than a learning product, or that run into all the issues of kids on the internet in general and bullying and, you know, the shady characters that try to join your platform or whatever. So we have said that we want to, at some point when the time is right, explore this space, but we're both a little wary of doing so because of the number of things we don't know yet. And we're actually slightly more hopeful about putting parents in groups where they can communicate with one another, partly because we've done it in the past with that literacy project we ran 5 years ago, and partly because we feel like it's less prone to abuse. And, you know, parents can make better, you know, subjective judgments about whether they want to or don't want to be part of something like that. And we know that the peer pressure that isn't necessarily overt, it's more subtle, can be quite powerful between parents. So if you're in a group of parents and everybody's saying, oh yeah, my daughter did this today, my son did that, and you're like you're the only person who hasn't reported anything, then you're probably gonna go, hey, have you done your homework, you know? Because you don't want to look like the bad parent. And so it's a nice kind of indirect way of us doing it. And again, you know, there's lots of research in psychology and behavior change that suggests one of the most important and effective ways of bringing about behavior change isn't to point to the benefits of something like it's really beneficial for you to eat healthier or to switch off your lights to save the environment or whatever it is, but rather 80% of your neighbors are recycling. Oh, okay. Like if other people,
this anxiety drives a lot of behavioral change.
Yeah, and also we feel bad if we're the only ones in the community that not doing it. So if I put you in a group, everybody else's kids seem to be studying hard. You're like, oh, my kids should also be studying hard. And so I think there's something there. It's one that we want to explore. We're running some initial experiments around that. But we have to be careful once again, because especially with WhatsApp being the platform of choice, a lot of people have like WhatsApp group, sort of experiences where that just turns into spamming and other things. So
WhatsApp group fatigue, is a real
WhatsApp group fatigue, exactly. So we just have to be careful about how it's run. Also, constellation of groups matters a lot. So it could backfire if we put 5 very quiet individuals in the same group and nobody answers a question. So group composition matters a ton. Here we've been inspired by some behavior change programs in the United Kingdom, a company that has focused a lot on group interactions and dynamics. And I actually went through their dieting program for 12 weeks just to see the way they ran it. I think there's really exciting work, but it's not as easy as just throw a bunch of people into a community together and say, go at it. It's much, much, much more fiddly in terms of group composition. And that's, again, why we think it's appropriate once we're at a slightly larger scale, where we have the freedom to pick and choose different personality profiles and create a well-balanced groups. But yeah, look, it's really exciting. One of the things I ran as a side experiment was to put the highest performing learners in our program into a group together, on the proviso that maybe they'll be inspired by other top performers. And that seems to have worked a little bit better than just putting average people together. So for what it's worth, that's a tidbit that others could take. The other thing I should say, and I maybe should have said at the top of the call, is that I'm sharing extremely freely here, including things we're just starting to explore, because I came into this edtech space wanting to move the needle forward, and I realized over time that we're not going to be able to do all that alone. It's a community effort, and we're learning as much from other initiatives that are being tried, and some succeeding, some failing, as we are through our own initiatives and experiments. So I just welcome everybody who is interested in this space to share as freely as they can, and to not worry about people stealing your ideas or whatever, because it's a huge opportunity out there. There are hundreds of millions of kids who don't have anything like the standard of education they need. And if we're parochial about our knowledge and trying to sit on it like it's our secret and nobody should get at it, this is just going to take longer, and we're going to lose more.
Yeah, and the a large part of success is in the implementation, the capacity to implement.
Right, which is also why I'm not so worried, because if I tell people groups sound exciting, they're like, great, we'll do groups, and I'm like, well, good luck.
So you see if that drives revenue for you, whether or not the group in itself works. Yeah. Okay, so we've been speaking for a while. I haven't actually been monitoring the time, but I'm going to end off with a last question, which is, and it's a big question, and it's one that we touched on before we began speaking when we spoke by email, which is, what future do you see for EdTech in general, and for what you call your offering, which is the supplemental EdTech space?
Mm-hmm. So for me right now, if you look at the world, the most exciting innovations are happening in Asia. They're happening in places like China and India. They're happening there because there is a growing middle class who want the best for their kids. They are willing to spend the money on it. I mean, setting aside a very significant proportion of household income to ensure that their kids get ahead. There is probably an unhealthy degree of pressure on those children, I hasten to add. So I'm not saying it's an ideal model, but what that willingness to invest has done is it created just these really, really, exciting startups that are using things like artificial intelligence to do tutoring on the fly, or you take a photo of your maths question and a computer analyzes it for you and sends you back the answer. And then armies of people who are doing virtual tutoring and Zoom classes and things like that, but delivered much more professionally than your local teacher who is only somewhat digitally literate trying to keep a class in order over a basic video conferencing site. So basically, when you take good pedagogy and you mix it with really excellent tech, I think good things can happen, and I would look to those countries. I mean, there are apps out there that have tens of millions of users that we've never heard of. So most people wouldn't know who Watobe is or Squirrel AI. or Byju's or RoboTutor or any of these companies that I'm mentioning, but they're bigger than Khan Academy, many of them, right, in terms of weekly active users. So we're just in this kind of English-speaking bubble,
We are.
and we don't look elsewhere. So I would say look at those companies, look at what they're doing right. Also, be a little bit wary. They're sometimes operating in areas where there isn't a lot of regulation. They can make bold claims about the effectiveness of their services that aren't necessarily backed up by evidence. But for the most part, if you just look at the share of wallet that those types of services are taking in people's lives, it is quite common that they say, I used to send my kid to after-school classes, just as everyone else in my community. I've stopped those. Kid comes straight back home, opens the tablet, and does them online. Standard. And that is not standard here in South Africa yet, and it's not standard anywhere across the African continent. So we see, Watobe sees Africa as the next frontier for those kind of things. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed listening to you and really appreciate you sharing your experiences and your knowledge, which is vast. So thank you.
Yeah, this has been super fun, and I'm probably gonna have to tone it down when I get interviewed by the big media companies, so that I don't have, I don't get wrapped on the fingers by my co-founder says you gave it all away.
Well, I'll send the video to you, and you can ask for edits if you need to. All right.
All good. I'm happy with what we talked.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure. Now, what I didn't have a chance to do was, get to know more about your research and work. So where can I dig in a little bit more into that?
Okay. So when the channel is up, I will send you a link, and then there will be more information there about the trajectory of this specific project. But I'll send you some links to some information in the meantime as well. Yep.
Yeah, because I do remember from our phone call 2 years ago that you were doing some really interesting things, and I'm sure you have connections that would potentially benefit us as well. So if there's a way that we could tap some of your knowledge and expertise or contacts in a way that would benefit us, then please do share. I'm always interested in those.
Absolutely.
Having a
No, I'll definitely reach back. I will in the next couple of weeks. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Erik.
much.
Have a lovely weekend.
Same to you. Bye-bye.
Cool. Bye-bye.